As we turn our attention right now to the federal government and its scramble to contain this massive rotten egg salmonella outbreak. Thousands of people, have you heard this, gotten sick across the country. Almost 400 million eggs have been recalled. The CDC says the situation's likely to get worse. The bad eggs came from, yes, a bad egg, the DeCoster Mega Agribusiness in Iowa. It's a company with a seriously dicey safety record. Surprise, surprise. Back in 1996, Jack DeCoster runs the place, was fined with more than $3 million after workers were found living in rat-infested trailers around dead chickens. Apparently that's not allowed. In 2000, Iowa fined DeCoster $150,000 and labeled him a habitual offender for violating environmental laws. And just this year, DeCoster pled guilty to 10 counts of animal cruelty and had to pay more than $100,000. Now, this guy may be one of the worst offenders, but is this what we get with the food industry that relies on industrial corporate farm factories instead of locally generated agribusiness? Michele Simon, a public health lawyer, author of Appetite for Profit. Michele, a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. There's the book. Talk to me about DeCoster first, and then we'll scale up to the broader systems. But is this guy, the guy running this egg farm, the equivalent of a BP or a Massey Energy or a Goldman Sachs in the sense that it's sort of one of the worst offenders in what maybe an otherwise inconsistent level of quality when it comes to these companies? Is that fair?
Well, certainly he is one example of the worst, and it sort of reminds me a little bit of a priest who gets caught in one church and then just goes to the next town over, because this guy was caught in Maine and now he's in Iowa. But I think it's important to realize that the system that he operates under is widespread. So while this is obviously one of the worst examples, and that's when we find out about it, when they are this bad, this guy obviously should have been shut down years ago.
Sure. So to educate us a little bit more on the system as to how everybody's getting their food and what the risks and why they've decided to make this system and what the risks are.
Well, it's simple, profit motive, right? I mean, anytime you have a system like we do with our food supply, just like we treat food like anything, like couches, like, you know, anything you can name that is driven by profit motive will have what economists call externalities. And Americans enjoy a very cheap food supply, but that cheap food comes at a high cost. And so when you have this profit motive to intensify factory farms, when you house tens of thousands of birds under one roof, when you cram these animals together into tight cages, the inevitable result when you're dealing with live animals is contamination, right? Because this isn't the same as just couches or anything inanimate. These are animals that get contaminated, and when you treat them this way, this is the result. The public health result of this is directly related to how the animals are treated. And of course, there are many other examples of this sort of inevitable outcome of our intensified food system.
So let me ask you a question. How will we get to a place where you have a localized food chain in general, or at least the aspiration towards the development of localized food chains, not just in rich communities, not just in Berkeley, California, everywhere? How would you achieve that localization that clearly is the most enjoyable? Anybody who's ever been to a farm stand anywhere in this world has enjoyed buying whatever they bought, I'm sure more than they did in a lot of other places, and at the same time not endure the Whole Foods factor of, oh, well, this is only for rich white suburbanites to have their fancy blueberries, but at the end of the day, this sort of high-quality local food is only for rich people, and if you want food for poor people, well, then you're going to have to jam a bunch of chickens together in a combine somewhere and ship them eggs, and sometimes they're going to get sick. How do you reconcile those two?
Right. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we have a regulatory system that really puts these intense confinement operations, it gives them incentives to operate this way. And we don't give enough economic incentives to the people who do want to do things right. So the local organic farmers.
So let's say I want to open a crazy chicken ranch and get rich and buy a boat, and I hear that there's a lot of demand for eggs, and you want to develop a local farm in Iowa or in Tennessee or Texas. What's the barrier to you doing that, and what incentivizes me to create my crazy chicken ranch?
Well, if you happen to be the beneficiary of many USDA agricultural subsidies,
thank you,
which make many things cheaper to operate on a massive scale. So all of the inputs that go into these factory farms, a good example, not necessarily related to eggs, but to beef operation and our dairy supply, is corn. So corn is a huge input into our feedlots, and that is subsidized by the U.S. government. So we are subsidizing a system that is furthering the intensification of factory farming and, of course, the mass production of food that we know to be unhealthy. So that's the other side of it.
So so let's just stop there. So I got taxpayer money coming to me and my massive chicken farm, and I've got the lobbying money from the corn people who are, and the corn is obviously cheap sugar and not terribly nutritious, certainly not in the pervasive use that it has been adopted for. Maybe nice on the cob in August, but otherwise probably left best on the cob. What about you? You now want to start a small farm and just sell eggs in the community and sort of a little bit of everything, if you will.
Right. Well, there's the competition factor, right? I mean, how did we get to this place where so much of our food supply is concentrated? Because in order for farmers to stay in business, they have to compete with the guy next door. And the guy next door is going to keep, you know, growing bigger and bigger and put you out of business. So that's just a basic competition problem. But we also have this problem, again, where Americans have gotten used to this daily cheap supply of food, and largely foods that we really shouldn't be eating as much as we are. And so, yes, we are going to have to pay more for certain things like cage-free eggs or, you know, hormone-free meat and so forth. But you know what? We're not really supposed to be eating these types of foods 3 times a day as much as the animal industry would like us to think.
Because it's profitable for them if we eat 3 times a day, but it's not necessarily healthy for us to eat it 3 times a day. I got it. I hope you'll come back. I appreciate your giving me and the rest of us a little bit more insight and education on the subject as we look at the eggs. The book, Appetite for Profit. A pleasure to have the opportunity to have the conversation.